Chapter 31, Dungeon 7. Quickly change this to code black. Hurriedly shouting orders, Thomas disappeared from where he was standing. God damn it. This is more serious than I had expected. Quickly teleporting back into the black market, Thomas quickly pressed the emergency button, causing the whole facility to turn red as alarms started ringing. Dying. Taking out his phone, he quickly dialed a number. Ring. Hello? From the other side of the phone, a cold, emotionless voice entered Thomas's ears. Boss, we have a situation. Explain. Dungeon Gate 756, code black, possible dungeon desync. Pausing slightly, the cold voice said. I understand, you will be granted full authority regarding this matter. Tack. Right after saying that, the person on the other side of the phone hung up, leaving Thomas standing there speechlessly. God damn it. Why do I always have to do the dirty work? Cursing out loud and stomping his feet in anger, Thomas quickly dialed another number. Ring. Yes? Shortly after dialing the number, a male voice entered Thomas's ears. Hearing the voice, Thomas quickly shouted orders. Call in all Alpha units with a rank F or below. Sorry? Do it now. It's an order. Why yes. Suddenly being ordered by Thomas, the person on the other side of the phone was left momentarily confused, but as soon as he noticed the urgency in Thomas's voice, he immediately did as he was instructed. Tack. Hanging up the phone, Thomas looked around. The whole facility was in a state of lockdown, and the whole place was dyed red as alarms constantly rang through the surroundings. Pinching the middle of his brows, Thomas sighed. I seriously hope the situation is not as dire as I think it is. Deep gashes started appearing all over my body as the demon traced his finger around my body. It felt as if I was being cut by a cold metal knife. I wanted to move, but I couldn't. It felt as if a massive boulder was weighing down on me, preventing me from moving. Although the Baron of Everblood was not using his main body, the presence exerted by him wasn't something I could handle. Baron of Everblood had killed countless experts throughout his whole life. He rose from being a regular demon to against all odds becoming a Baron-ranked demon. Countless sacrifices were made in his journey to the top. He had shed lots of blood throughout his journey to the top. He had also backstabbed demons whom he had once called friends just to be able to reach the point that he was now. Just now, all that the Baron of Everblood needed to do was release the killing intent that he had acquired through countless killings, to completely paralyze me. Knowing this, I needed to buy myself time to adapt to the killing intent. It's just that it was much easier being said than done. It felt like a looming threat that was similar to a longsword that hung in my heart, ready to pierce it and kill me at a moment's notice, causing my body to paralyze in fear. Very soon, as I felt death coming closer to me, an idea came into my mind as I started speaking. Aren't you curious as to why I know what you're doing? Halting, Baron of Everblood stopped tracing his finger on my body and looked at me. Speak. The only reason you haven't killed me yet is because you want to know how I knew you were trying to create a dungeon overload, right, KHK? Tracing his sharp black finger on my neck, a red line appeared. Blood slowly dripped down from the cut, falling onto the cold ground. Get to the point. KH, not only do I know that you're trying to create a dungeon overload, but I also know that this isn't the only dungeon you're planning to overload. Altoag, I knew that spilling what I knew was stupid. I had no choice. It was either this or death. I had to buy time. At least enough to figure out how to get out of this situation. Moreover, me revealing what I knew to Baron of Everblood wasn't actually that significant of a matter. Hierarchy mattered to the demons. With the fact that he was Baron-ranked demon, I knew that he didn't actually hold that much authority. Even if I escaped from this ordeal, chances were that even if he reported what I told him to the higher-ranked demons, unless he brought proof, his findings would most likely get dismissed. Thus it didn't matter if I spilled what I knew. There was a high chance that the case would not go anywhere. Moreover, what mattered to me the most was my life. As long as I bought time, I could definitely figure something out. Exclamation point. Thud. Suddenly, as soon as I finished speaking, the pressure that enveloped me magnified. My legs, which couldn't withstand the pressure, finally gave out, and I knelt on the cold hard ground. Gripping me from the neck, Baron of Everblood lifted my body up. My face was only a few centimeters away from his face. We were so close that I could feel his breath on my face. The demon's breath was like hot steam. It slowly burned the skin on my face, turning it red. Facing Baron of Everblood's hot breath, my face winced in pain. Turning my head to the side, I tried my best to avoid his mouth. It hurt. Speak. Gripping on my neck even harder, Baron of Everblood fiercely stared at me. I know that you're planning in advance for when the mana in the atmosphere becomes dense enough for the monsters to be able to withstand humans' atmosphere. Coo. Feeling the grip on my neck become tighter, I took advantage of the small gap that was created by the Baron of Everblood as he was distracted by my statement to free myself from his grip. Staring at his now empty hand, Baron of Everblood stared in my direction. His already blood-red eyes turned a shade darker as he spat out his next words in pure fury. Oh. It seems like someone has not suffered enough. Huff, huff. Holding onto my neck, I heavily gulped for air and glared at Baron of Everblood. Click. Ha. A thick black arm flew into the air as Baron of Everblood stood there rooted in his spot, stupefied. He couldn't react in time. Slowly standing up, I sheathed my sword back into my scabbard. Damn this. Damn this. Just that move alone used most of my mana. I needed to think of something quick. Dungeon Seekers, Mission Control Room. Inside of a large enclosed room, 20 large tables, all with several computer displays, were filled with people tirelessly working together as they exchanged data. A large screen was at the front of the room, displaying rows upon rows of data for the entire team inside of the room. On the side, on the walls, there was a multitude of clocks, displaying everything from the current time to the time every entrant has been inside of a dungeon. This was so that they could monitor if someone stayed inside of the dungeon more than the designated time. On one of the large tables, with his hands leaning on the table, an individual who had a headset and microphone on his head looked to his right as he reported. Reporting Alpha units have entered Dungeon 756, Red Desolation. Thomas, who had his arms crossed, looked at the monitor in front of him where multiple camera views could be seen. Ask for a status report. Roger. Inside of a desolate world where a deep red sky enveloped the environment. Only the sound of the wind rustling through twisted, shrubby trees could be heard. Suddenly, the silence was disrupted as white-clad individuals materialized in the desolate world. Voom. 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 Alpha teams, do a status report. Alpha Unit 70154, check. Alpha Unit 62584, check. Alpha Unit 75894, check. Alpha Unit 48334, check. All teams confirmed. Alpha Mission Operation Captain, turn on your camera and report what you are seeing. Click. Turning on the camera that rested above his pec, a white-clad individual with a golden ring on his arm spoke. Camera activated, taking measurements, trying to gain contact with dungeon guardians who had entered previously. KHHHHH. Hearing a continuous static sound coming from his receiver, the captain shook his head. Unresponsive. Okay, order all Alpha teams to proceed forward. Alpha teams, move. Marching forward in an organized pattern, all the white-clad individuals followed the captain deep into the dungeon. Schwa. PFFFFF. A white line materialized in front of the Baron of Everblood and black blood slowly fell on the floor. Gripping my sword tightly, I applied more pressure on the handle of my sword that stabbed his body. In the heart. You think this can actually hurt me? Grabbing the sword that stabbed his body, Baron of Everblood cruelly smiled as he slowly pulled the sword out from his body. TCH, you immortal bastard. Seeing his nonchalant behavior as if a sword stabbing his body was nothing, my heart sank. Pam. Before I even had enough time to retrieve my sword back, I felt a massive force on my stomach forcing me to bend over in pain. Barf. The force was so strong that my taste buds were engulfed in a bitter and sour taste as green liquid splurted from my mouth. Caw. Clank. To think you actually thought you had a chance against me. Throwing my sword to the side, I could hear the sound of metal hitting the ground. Each time I heard the sound of my sword clattering on the ground, parts of my heart shattered along with it. Without the sword I was nothing. My only chance at fighting back was gone. Looking at the Baron of Everblood, who was slowly approaching me with a wide grin plastered on his face, seemingly relishing my expression of despair, finally fear overtook me. Let me teach you what happens when you piss off a demon. What's this? Alp KHHHSTS Rep. T. Not bothered in the slightest by the fact that the radio signal was getting disrupted, all of the Alpha Team's members stood rooted where they were as their eyes transfixed themselves on the horizon. In their view, a massive wall of sand slowly approached them. It felt as if an avalanche was approaching them in a form of formless mass. Soon it enveloped them. Inside the storm, extremely high winds lifted the sand particles into the air, unleashing a turbulent, suffocating cloud that reduced the visibility of everyone inside of it to almost nothing in a matter of seconds. KHHHHHHH. Apart from the raging sound of the wind, only the static sound of the radio could be heard. Ah! Staring at my arm, which was bent at a weird angle, I screamed in pain. It felt as if a wave of electricity has coursed through my body. Excruciating. Now, we are only just beginning, don't disappear on me already. Grinning evilly, Baron of Everblood licked his lips as he looked down on my body, which was sprawled on the ground. Staring at his expression that seemed to take enormous pleasure at my suffering, I hatefully glared in his direction. Previously, when I was attacking him, I wasn't just blindly attacking him. I knew since the beginning that his body was immortal. That was because his body was actually fake. It was merely a part of his real body that could endlessly regenerate. Had he not done that, then he would have never been able to enter an F-rank dungeon. When I was attacking him, I was looking for his weakness, the core. Everything in the world had a weakness. Even the strongest being in the world had a weakness. The Demon King wasn't an exception. This was just the law of the world. Unless you were a god, no perfect being existed. Because this wasn't Baron of Everblood's main body, his main weakness was a core that was used to operate his body. I knew exactly what his weakness was, yet I faced a new problem. I didn't know where it was. I tried stabbing his body in multiple places, but it was to no avail as it always regenerated within seconds. And now that my sword was out of my reach, I lost all hope in defeating Baron of Everblood. What shall we break next? Suddenly, as I was in the midst of despair, like a shining ray of hope, I saw a small cut on the demon's arm. Previously, when I had cut the demon's arm off, I watched him regrow it in an instant, but looking at it now it seems like it had not fully healed as a small scar remained. Crack. Ah. Before I could rejoice, I felt the bones in my leg getting crushed, causing me to scream in pain. Relishing my pained expression, Baron of Everblood laughed loudly. Scream more. Crack.
Ah.
Alone in an empty castle, a demon laughed, whilst a human screamed in pain as the demon broke his legs. But unbeknown to the demon, with each scream the human slowly approaching a shiny metal sword that laid on the floor. Alpha Team respond, Alpha Team. KHHHHHHH. Staring at the screen that had turned black, Thomas quickly picked up the radio and tried to communicate with the Alpha Team members, but it was to no avail as all he heard was the static sound of the radio. Bam! Shh! *T. Slamming his fist on the table, Thomas's hands rested on the table as he frantically thought of solutions. Time was tight, he needed to quickly think of solutions. The more time passed, the bigger the likelihood of the Alpha Team being in danger increased. If he could have, he would have already dived into the dungeon himself, but because he was too strong he couldn't, less he wanted to risk killing everyone that was within the dungeon. Pacing around the room as he frantically called different numbers, Thomas suddenly heard an excited shout next to him. "Sir, we're getting a signal." Quickly arriving next to the individual who had shouted, Thomas quickly took the radio from his hands and spoke. "Alpha Team, do you copy? Alpha Team, do you copy?" Alpha Team responding, "We've found a survivor preparing first aid." Inside of a dark enclosed space, a demon sat crossed-legged as a frown appeared on his face. "MH? Is this it?" Through the vision of his clone, Baron of Everblood stared at the lifeless corpse on the floor. He shook his head in disappointment. It seemed like his new toy no longer worked. Shing! Ha! Just as he was about to end it, Baron of Everblood suddenly lost control of his clone's body as it slowly started disintegrating on the ground. Looking to his right, his clone's arm, he could see a sword stabbing straight into it, exactly where the core was located. Blankly staring at the now disappearing arm, Baron of Everblood looked up and saw the bloodthirsty expression of the young human who he was about to kill. "Wait for me." Voila. Those were the last words he heard before he felt his connection with the puppet disappear. As black embers filled the air, the demon's body disappeared from my view. Clank! Dropping the sword in my hand, I felt all my remaining energy drain from my body. Soon my body started twitching on the ground, and blood started dropping in the ground. Ah, is this how I die? What's this? Touching my cheeks I could feel drops of water falling down from the corner of my eyes. Slowly tears started staining my face. Was I crying? Why was I crying? I had already died once, why was I crying over such an insignificant matter? I am such a pussy. How could a grown man like me cry? Pathetic. Looking around, I could only lay on the floor pathetically as the floor became dyed in red. Slowly as the pool of blood around me expanded, vague recollections of my past life started resurfacing. At first, my life was great, I had a warm family that loved me.
So
much. I was happy then. Too bad you only realize how much you cherished something until you no longer had it. Since then my life had never been the same. I worked hard. I truly did. But all I got in return was a pathetic life where I would lifelessly be typing at my keyboard away. Every day was a struggle. My weight, my health, my job, my mental health, I was suffering so much. Then, I was suddenly transported into my own novel. A new beginning. A new start. I thought that maybe, just maybe I could use this chance to redo my life. I did everything I could so that I could at least be happy. Was asking for a bit of happiness too much? I don't want to die. My vision slowly became darker and darker. My body slowly turned cold, and I could feel my breath become thinner by the second. Slowly as my vision started to disappear I could faintly hear the sound of rushed footsteps coming my way. Was my mind playing tricks on me? Well, it didn't matter as my brain slowly lost its ability to think. We've found, survivor, prep, aid. Those were the last words I heard before I was enveloped in darkness. Chapter 32, Skills 1. Report everything that happened since we lost connection to you guys. Neatly standing in a line, white-clad individuals stood with their backs straight and with their hands behind their back. In front of them, Thomas stood there looking at them solemnly. Stepping up, a white-clad individual with a golden ring on his arm spoke. Reporting to Vice Director, during the sandstorm some sort of radio frequency disruptor was installed preventing us from communicating with the outside world. We also couldn't communicate with each other, and because of the low visibility I ordered them to stay within 1 meter radius of the closest person next to them. Nodding his head, Thomas took out a pack of cigarettes and lit one of them. Placing the cigarette in his mouth, he exhaled a cloud of smoke as he listened to the report. Puff. As demonic energy was detected before entering the gate, using the energy detector we managed to locate the source of the demonic energy. Pausing slightly, the captain looked around at his team members and said, "The eye of the storm."
The
eye? Are you sure? Affirmative. Frowning, Thomas pinched the middle of his brows and contemplated. If the source of the demonic energy was within the sandstorm, then it can be confirmed that this was an artificially created sandstorm, but why create a sandstorm? Suddenly, as he was contemplating, a thought struck him, causing him to quickly focus his attention back on the Alpha Team captain. "Did you enter the ice storm?" Shaking his head, the captain spoke. "Negative, by the time we arrived at the edge of the storm everything had already started dying down." Huh? Surprised by this information, Thomas's frown deepened. When everything died down, we managed to catch a glimpse of a black castle not far from where we stood. Interrupting once again, Thomas thought of something as he asked. "A black castle? Describe me its features." "Here, sir." Taking out a tablet, the captain handed it over to Thomas, who scrolled through the photos. Soon his face revealed a trace of astonishment. "This is the work of a baron or higher-ranked demon." "Pardon?" Confused, the captain tilted his head. How could a baron-ranked demon or higher be able to enter an F-rank dungeon? "Here, take a look at this." Pointing at the castle in the picture, Thomas pinched his fingers and zoomed in. Soon the features of the castle became clearer, revealing what seemed to be a small beacon. "This." Nodding his head, Thomas's face darkened, and gravely said, "Yes, it's a mana compressor." A mana compressor was a device used by the demons to compress all the mana inside of a dungeon. In doing so, they could create a small bomb with a power equivalent to 5 atomic bombs. The force released by the bomb was so strong that it would cause the pocket dimension to crumble, resulting in monsters suddenly appearing in the human world. A dungeon overload. Fortunately, monsters couldn't adapt to Earth's thin atmosphere. Else the consequences would have been disastrous. Moreover, a mana compressor could only be utilized by baron-ranked demons or above. That was because only baron-ranked demons or above could withstand the power of the mana compressor without going insane. Once a demon reached a noble rank, not only did they become stronger, but their mental fortitude increased by many folds. A mana compressor concentrated all the mana that was directed to it into a ball of thick, dense energy. But in order for it to do so, it needed someone to direct mana into it. This required an absurd amount of mental strength, as one needed to direct all the mana in the atmosphere into a specific point. That's where a demon came in. The demon would send a clone of their body in the dungeon, and through the connection they had with their clone they would direct the mana towards the mana compressor, which would slowly condense all the mana that was directed to it. Only baron-ranked demons or above could do so. I can't believe they were scheming such a thing from underneath our noses. Staring at the tablet for a bit, Thomas looked at the captain and asked. "Fortunately, it seems like the mana compressor has stopped working. Did you find anything else?" Nodding his head, the captain responded. "Affirmative." We have found a survivor.
Ah.
Yes, how could I forget that? He vaguely remembered hearing something about a survivor, but at the time he was too focused on making sure everyone was all right that it slipped through his mind. Scrolling down the tablet in his hands, his finger directly paused on a photo. Though when he had previously met him a mask covered his face, Thomas was instantly able to identify the person in the picture. It's him? Slowly opening my eyes, I blankly stared at the unfamiliar ceiling for a moment, then slowly I turned my head to the side. As my head cleared, a strong pungent smell of alcohol invaded my nostrils. The room was silent and apart from my heavy breathing, only the beeping sound coming from the electrocardiogram in the corner of the room could be heard. A throbbing pain hit my head as I looked at my body, which was covered in bandages. Aside from the bandages, long metal wires that connected to the electrocardiogram were attached to my body. I tried to get up. But once I tried to move my upper body, it was instantly engulfed in pain, refusing to listen to me. Slowly, my body sank onto the large white mattress. Laughing bitterly, I could only lay there pathetically, hoping for the pain to disappear. Staring at the ceiling, illuminated with white fluorescent light, a myriad of questions emerged in my head. How long have I been here? Where am I? What happened? Shutting my eyes, I tried to remember what had transpired prior to waking up in this unfamiliar environment. Clank! But before I could reminisce, the door of the room opened, and a doctor wearing a blue short-sleeved scrub top with a white coat and similar blue-colored pants entered the room. Behind the doctor, a rough blonde individual sat on a chair with his legs crossed and a newspaper in his hand. Mr. Thomas? Russell. Noticing something, Thomas, who had previously accompanied me to the gate, put away the newspaper in his hands and entered the room. He looked the same as when I first met him, but differently from last time. He was currently wearing a brown suit which was full of wrinkles. How are you feeling? All right, I guess. That's a relief. Sitting down next to my bed, Thomas loosened his necktie and took out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket. Do you mind? Shaking my head, I turned my head around and looked outside the window. It was currently nighttime in Ashton City, and the city lights brightly lit the area around the hospital. Puff.
Ah.
Just what I needed. Puffing a cloud of smoke, Thomas leisurely leaned back and also looked at the brightly lit night. You did good, kid. Because of you, we managed to stop a possible dungeon desync, which would have resulted in a serious loss for us. Pausing slightly, Thomas deeply looked at the star-filled night, so after a brief discussion with the higher-ups, a decision was made. Once again pausing, Thomas turned his attention towards me and couldn't help but let out a dry laugh as he spoke. Well, they decided to grant you a skill. A skill? Opening my eyes wide, I immediately shook my hands and refused. I haven't nearly Donnie enough to receive a skill. I was so shocked that I started stuttering as I couldn't help but be surprised by how generous they were. My bewildered reaction was understandable, as in this world if someone were to ask you what the most sought-after thing was, most wouldn't even think twice before answering skill. Even though monster parts, martial manuals, weapon manuals, cores were all things that held tremendous value, in the eyes of people their worth was far lower than skills. Unlike martial arts, weapon arts, or anything that required some sort of mastery, skills could be learned instantly. Typically a person would spend years learning a technique before they could proudly say that they had mastered it. However, with skills all you needed to do was learn it and all the information would instantly be transferred in your brain. There was no need to train the skill, as once you learned it you were capable of instantly using it. It was a total cheat. In a matter of seconds, you could do things that would generally require someone years of training to master. I mean, who wouldn't want them? Skills could be found inside of dungeons, and just like cores, you could get them from monsters. However, the drop rate compared to cores, which was already quite low, was even slimmer, resulting in skills being extremely rare. And thus once the first skill was discovered, similarly to cores, a huge uproar ensued as everyone started coveting them. I mean, who wouldn't want to become stronger without putting that much effort? From that point on, whenever a skill was found, huge auctions would be established. A single skill could go up for at least a couple million U in the auctions. Is helping us not lose a dungeon that earns us millions of U each day not something worth a skill? Plus we aren't really going to give you a high-ranking skill, just an F-ranked one. I guess you do have a point, but an F-ranked skilled is still a skill. Just don't fuss over such trivial thing. How can an F-ranked skill be considered a trivial thing? I thought to myself, as I once again realized how rich and powerful the black market was. To call an F-rank skill a trivial thing just goes to show how powerful of an organization they were. Although F-ranked skills were on the lower end of the spectrum, they were still worth a huge amount of money. Seeing how they didn't think much about an F-ranked skill, I couldn't help but wonder how many skills they had with them. Could they possibly be in possession of S-ranked skills? If so, then I had really underestimated how influential the black market was. Even as the author of the novel, I didn't know much regarding the black market as I never dwelled too deep on them in the story. They were merely a convenient organization that the protagonist used to facilitate his growth. I just knew the general layout of the organization, the identity of some of the higher-ups of the organization, but other than some other trivial information, the black market was shrouded in a veil of mystery. But it seems like they were a far bigger organization than I had made them out to be, especially if they were in possession of multiple S-ranked skills, which were far harder to find. There were only 18 S-ranked dungeons known to mankind, which was a dramatic difference compared to F-ranked dungeons which numbered over tens of thousands. As the supply was lower, the number of skills that could be acquired was also lower. Moreover, S-ranked dungeons were far harder than lower-ranked ones, making S-ranked skills that much harder to acquire. One S-ranked skill could pretty much allow someone to buy a small city. That's how expensive they were. But it has to be said that, although S-rank skills were indeed much stronger than lower-ranked skills, that didn't mean that low-ranking skills were useless. In fact, lower-ranked skills, depending on the person, could turn out to be far more useful than an S-ranked skill. Take an assassin for example. If they were given the option to choose between D-rank skill, Shadow Cloak, a skill that enables the user to hide under a shadow, or S-ranked skill, Tyrant's Wrath, which was a mass AoE skill, they would obviously prefer the D-ranked skill which was better suited for their profession. At the end of the day, it all came down to how compatible you were with the skill. All right, you better rest now. Standing up, and straightening his wrinkly suit, Thomas flicked the cigarette in his hand and lightly stomped on it with his foot. Once you recover, I'll guide you to where you can collect your skill. Finished with what he wanted to say, Thomas turned around and left the room. Chapter 33, Skills 2. Fortunately, thanks to how advanced the technology of this world was, all my broken bones and cuts were healed overnight. What used to take months to heal back in my previous world, healed overnight. Truly miraculous. It was Sunday morning, and Thomas came to pick me up. It was finally time for me to collect my reward. A skill. I had originally planned on acquiring a skill when my strength reached a certain level, but it came as a pleasant surprise for me to be able to get my hands on one this early in the novel. It has to be noted that within the academy, apart from the professors, only a small percentage of students had skills. This was including the third years. Only the rich second-generation heirs could even have a chance at acquiring a skill, and even then, they could only gain access to at most a couple. They were just too expensive and rare for guilds to freely give them away. Following Thomas inside of a remote location that was heavily guarded against all directions, arriving in front of a large building that seemed to look like regular storage space, Thomas nodded towards an empty space. Soon a couple of shadows in the form of two white-clad guards materialized in front of us. I was slightly startled by their appearance, but I soon calmed down. The people guarding this place should obviously be strong, else what was the point of even storing such valuable things here? After doing multiple checks on Thomas, the guards that were clad in white hid in the shadows, completely masking their presence. After seeing the guards disappearing, Thomas placed his palm on the wall. Clank! A couple of seconds after placing his palm on the wall, a small section on the wall disappeared, revealing a small compartment that contained a digital 6-digit lock. Beep! 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 Arriving in front of the box, Thomas quickly inserted the passcode. Right after inserting the password, a green light blinked a couple of times, and soon after, in a similar fashion to before, a small circular compartment appeared on the wall. Opening his right eye wide, Thomas leaned on the wall and placed his eyes on the hole. Clank! Vroom! Seconds after placing his eye on the wall, a loud rumbling resonated across the surroundings and the overhead door slid upwards. That's one hell of an annoying process. Stretching his back, Thomas grumbled as he waited for the door to completely slide upwards. As soon as the door opened completely, I felt a blinding light enter my eyes, prompting me to cover my eyes with my arm. After the light died down, a completely unknown world was presented before me. A thick metallic scent instantly entered my nostrils as I passed the large metallic gate. Soon, the scent was replaced by an aromatic scent that pleasantly enveloped my nose. Beyond the door, an open entryway with high ceilings painted with vivid imagery depicting an image of several humans fighting against a demon instantly caught my attention. The marble floor, polished to the point that the lights neatly reflected on the marble, reminded of a clear lake that gently reflected the sun rays coming from the sun. Arriving inside of a spacious room with patterned walls, heavy curtains, area rugs, high windows, and upholstered furniture made of heavy oak, Thomas told me to patiently sit down on a red sofa. Feeling my body sink on the sofa, I nervously waited for Thomas. To say I wasn't nervous would be a lie. Although there was no one present in the room, it felt as if a million eyes were staring down at me, watching my every move. Every moment that Thomas was away felt like hours. Fortunately, the wait did not last for long and Thomas soon came back with a red card in his hand. Follow me. Handing me the card, he urged me to follow him as he walked towards a certain area within the facility. Nodding, I followed along as I admired the hallway that was filled with paintings, designer pieces, and other artistic decor that made this place feel like an establishment for the filthy rich. Soon we arrived in front of a large safe door, in which two individuals patiently stood. However, what instantly caught my attention was the fact that although their uniform was similar to the regular guards in the black market, contrary to their white color, theirs was red, indicating that they had a higher status than the white-clad ones. Made sense since they were the last defensive line that led to the vault. Nodding to the guards, Thomas's footsteps halted. Looking at me solemnly, he said, "All right, before I leave, let me warn you in advance. You are only allowed to choose one skill, let me repeat, one skill." As he spoke, Thomas repeatedly emphasized the fact that I could only take one skill. Looking at me to make sure I understood, he continued. "As you already know, skills are expensive even for us. Though our organization may be powerful, giving away skills to non-members is still a bit of a burden for us. If not for the fact that you helped us solve a major crisis, we would have never considered giving you a skill." Listening attentively, I repeatedly nodded my head. Everything that he said I already knew. His seriousness was understandable as skills were indeed worth a lot. Pausing slightly, Thomas had a gratified smile on his face as he looked at me, who understood what he said. Taking the red card from my hand, he handed it to the guards. "Another thing you need to remember is that the skill you can choose can only be between rank G and F, higher ranked skills will be inaccessible to you. The vault you're about to enter has 3 floors, in which you will only be granted access to the first floor. Lightly chuckling, Thomas teasingly looked at me. If you manage to repeat what you did again, we might just grant you access to the higher floors. I'm good. Instantly my mouth twitched as I wholeheartedly refused. No way would I want to go through that experience again. All right, I'll wait outside. Once you're done with choosing your skill, you can directly learn it under the watch of one of the guards. Finishing what he wanted to say, Thomas stepped to the side and allowed me to enter the vault. Stand there. Stopping in front of the door of the vault, the red-clad guard pointed towards a certain point. Vroom. Following his order, I stood on the spot that the guard pointed. Soon my whole body was enveloped in red light. Ding. Ding. All right, you're all set. Beep. Krrrrrrr. Swiping the card on the vault, a green light appeared following which a loud rumbling could be heard as the door of the vault slowly opened. All right, have fun, kid. Nonchalantly waving his hand, Thomas leaned on the wall and took out a packet of cigarettes only to be glared at by the guards, causing him to bitterly smile. Amusingly shaking my head, I headed towards the vault. Clank! Stepping into the vault, the door behind me closed. Soon silence enveloped my surrounding. Looking up, I could see large, sturdy bookshelves lining the walls, marching across the floor in colorful rows, stretching all the way to the end of the first floor. A staircase leading to a second level could be seen at the end of the room. Wow! The endless amount of skills presented in front of me left me flabbergasted. In the F rank section alone, there were no less than 1,000 books. Skills, like in games, came in the form of a book. That's why this place looked no different from a regular library. Each book had a different color and represented the different affinity of the skill book, ranging from fire, water, earth, and so on. You have 1 hour to select your skill. Just as I was in a daze, snapping me out of it was a cold voice that came from the speaker in the corner of the room. Quickly recollecting myself, I looked through the G and F rank sections. Because there were so many skills to choose from, I immediately decided to narrow down my scope of search. First things first, I immediately chose to exclude skills that required a high mana consumption. Because I was not a mage, my mana capacity was fairly low. Choosing a skill that drained of all the mana in my body would be extremely detrimental for me, as the Keiki style, too, used a bit of mana whenever I execute a skill. If I didn't use mana, there was no way I would have been able to move so fast. Excluding that, my scope diminished dramatically. Secondly, I needed a skill that shared some synergy with the Keiki style. When fighting against Baron of Everblood, I noticed that although the Keiki style was powerful, in the beginning stages it was a fairly subpar sword art. Mainly because once my first move was blocked, I could no longer do anything else, as shown how Baron of Everblood negated me by allowing my sword to penetrate his body. I needed something that could buy me time so that I could readjust my stance, or at least something that complemented my fighting style. Having narrowed it down even further, I decided to look through the F and G sections. Looking through, I couldn't help but drool at some of the skills. I found some especially amazing skills. One especially caught my attention. Fist of Fury, a punching skill that conglomerates all the mana within a certain radius, releasing a devastating punch that can leave devastating damage if someone is caught off guard. Monetarily increases strength by a factor of 2. Reading the description of the first skill I picked up in the F rank section, my mouth dropped in an O shape. Increases strength by a factor of 2? That's terrifying. Especially if someone who was already super strong used the skill. Imagine one of the heads of the Union using this skill. Their punch alone could probably shake a whole mountain. This skill basically became scarier the higher someone's rank was. If this was the standard of F-ranked skills, a shudder ran down my spine thinking about the higher ranked skills. Though I knew some of the S-ranked skills that Kevin would later acquire, it didn't stop my mind from imagining the devastating scene they would cause in real life. Thank God, they were rare. Looking through the bookshelves, I paused every now and then to get a better understanding of some of the skills. This continued for 30 minutes until finally, I managed to narrow down my selection to 3 skills. 2 of the skills were F rank, while 1 was G rank. G, a monarch's indifference, skill that enables users to erase all emotions and act as a supreme monarch that only calculates the best option regardless of emotions. F, a flame sanctuary, skill that summons a ring of fire around the user. Apart from the user, scorching heat will envelop everyone that is within the flame sanctuary. F, winter's breath, skill that enables the user to exhale a breath full of frost, resulting in the surrounding temperature within a certain radius to drop below freezing temperature. Reduce enemy speed by a factor of 2. These 3 skills were the ones that were the most useful for me right now. Not because they were strong but because they fit my fighting style perfectly. F, I Flame Sanctuary, attracted me because it was a skill that could buy me time. By invoking this skill I could momentarily catch my opponent off guard, and during the time my opponent was surprised I could regain my stance and attack them again. F, Winter's Breath, served a similar purpose to Flame Sanctuary, but contrary to that skill this one slowed down the opponent. Unlike Flame Sanctuary, that could be used to end a fight by catching them off guard, this skill was more for a prolonged fight. It could help me gain a huge advantage when fighting as the Keiki style, shined when the enemy was slower. In terms of synergy, this one was the one that shared the most synergy compared to the other 2 skills. Lastly, G, a monarch's indifference, the only G rank skill in the list, and probably the one that tempted me the most. One thing that I reflected on from my fight against Baron of Everblood was that, had I been calmer, I wouldn't have found myself in such a dire situation. As soon as his arm reconstructed itself, I should have noticed the fact that only a part of it healed. I was too caught up by his presence that I did not notice such small detail. Had I done so, the fight would have ended quickly and I wouldn't have had to suffer so much. Moreover, Monarch's indifference was especially beneficial to me who had yet to kill a human. Yes, I did technically kill Lucas and Patrick, but that was in the VR world where I felt no guilt in killing them. Being someone that came from Earth where you were preached since birth that killing was bad, I still couldn't bring myself to actually kill a human. At least not yet. Killing a human in this day and age was something most students within the academy would have to do at least once, as we would eventually be tasked to kill certain villains. The mental hurdle I needed to push myself to kill a human was much higher than the people that were born in this world who were exposed to such things since birth. With the aid of a monarch's indifference, I wouldn't need to worry about that anymore. Moreover, with this skill, when fighting against an opponent, emotions like nervousness, fear and anxiety would never cloud my judgment again, allowing me to perform at my best during critical times, reducing the likelihood of me dying. Having thought it through, I decided to pick Monarch's Indifference. Although it was the only G rank skill in the list, this skill, for me, was the most useful out of the 3 skills I picked. I just had this feeling that regardless of how powerful I became in the future, this skill would accompany me to the end. Chapter 34, Skills 3. Clank. Arriving at the entrance of the vault, a compartment opened up. Place the skill inside of the box. Soon, a cold voice rang in my ears, to which I followed as ordered and placed the book inside the compartment. Looking at the book which was inside of the compartment, I couldn't help but look at it carefully. It had lumpy leather bindings, and its pages were of golden color. The cover of the leather book was empty, with no title nor pictures on it. Although it looked like a book, when I tried opening it, I couldn't. No matter how much force I exerted, the book wouldn't budge. Fascinating. KRRRRRR. After placing the skill book inside of the compartment, the vault door rumbled, slowly opening up. Waiting for me on the other side of the door was Thomas, accompanied by the two red-clad individuals. All good? Walking up to me, Thomas took a quick peek at the vault. Seeing that everything was all right, he urged me to follow him, and we were soon back in the waiting room. Wait here while I'll go and check if everything is all right. Nodding my head, I watched Thomas leave. Ignoring the fact that I was once again alone in the room that felt like millions of eyes were watching, I excitedly thought of my soon-to-be skill. Now that I thought about it, this skill was basically tailor-made for me. As someone who was not exposed to a society where superpowers and no morals existed, a skill like this was what I needed to help me adapt against situations that would require me to do things I wouldn't have otherwise ever thought of doing back in my previous world. Things such as killing or witnessing gore were not something I could get used to immediately. This was partly one of the main reasons I was so overwhelmed by Baron of Everblood's presence before. Had it been Kevin or any of the other protagonists, such a thing wouldn't have impacted them as hard as much it did me. As I was deep in my thoughts, with a complicated expression, Thomas walked back into the room. Soon, with my skill book in his hands, Thomas arrived in front of me and asked, "Are you sure about this?" "Positive." Lightly smiling, I nodded and took the skill book from his hands. "All right, suit yourself." Although it seemed like he wanted to say something, Thomas stopped himself midway and just waved his hand in resignation. Not noticing his reaction as I was too engrossed looking at the skill book, I immediately placed my hand on top of the book and circulated my mana. Soon a white glow enveloped me, and the book magically disappeared. Closing my eyes, a flood of information instantly transmitted itself in my mind. It took me a total of 5 minutes to digest all the information. Opening my eyes, a satisfied smile appeared on my face. Checking my status, I was pleasantly surprised by its changes. Status . Name, Rendover. Rank, F. Strength, F. Agility, F. Stamina, F. Intelligence, F. Mana capacity, G+. Luck, E. Charm, G. Profession. Swordsmanship LVL.1. Martial Manual. Keiki Style. Sword art created by Grandmaster Toshimoto Keiki. A 5-star module that focused primarily on reaching the apex of swordsmanship and speed. Upon mastery, the sword art becomes so fast that before an opponent could even think about their next move, their heads would already be rolling on the ground. Skills. G. A Monarch's Indifference. A skill that enables users to erase all emotions and act as a supreme monarch that only calculates the best option regardless of circumstance. Surprisingly, my rank increased from G+ to F. I did not notice it before because I was busy recovering, but it seems like my stats had shot up a notch. I had not suffered in vain. I think that all the time I spent killing monsters and nearly dying against Baron of Everblood had helped me finally rank up. Satisfied, my smile, which wouldn't leave my face, deepened. "Kid, wipe that smile off your face, it's creepy." Ignoring Thomas, who was looking at me with a disgusted face, I went through the information that had just entered my mind. I really wanted to use the skill right here and right now, but I knew that it was inappropriate. Moreover, with my current mana capacity, I could only use the skill for approximately 30 minutes. Though it was not long, 30 minutes should be enough, as my stamina was about that much anyways. Also, as long as I improved my mana capacity, the time at which I could utilize the skill would also increase. All right, let's go. Sighing, Thomas left the room we were in. Soon we were at the entrance of the storage space. Here? ? Stopping, Thomas looked back at me and handed me a small card. Taking the card, I looked at it in confusion. Soon I understood. Yup, this is your last reward. You've been promoted to VIP. Really? Yeah, since you only chose a G rank skill, I felt a bit compelled to give you this. Thanks. Looking at the shining black card with a golden VIP sign engraved on it, I couldn't help but feel my already good mood become even better. The VIP card not only granted me access to the black market without the need to go through the hassle of remembering the password, but it also allowed me to get priority on all dungeons, as well as the fact that I wouldn't need to pay a deposit in the case of emergencies. This alone was enough for me to become happy, yet the VIP card had one other feature that made all the other perks seem like nothing. It allowed me to have access to any dungeon available. Yes. Be it C rank, B rank, A rank, I could enter any dungeon I wanted. Yes, although going to dungeons of D rank and above was almost like asking to be killed, they had their perks. They were a great way to help me train my mentality. Although I wouldn't do any killing inside of a D rank dungeon, just being there could help me adapt myself to the pressure exerted by D rank creatures. This was extremely advantageous as it would help me not panic once I encountered a stronger enemy. From what I learned when fighting against Baron of Everblood, in a fight, 90% of it was the mentality and 10% was actual skills. If your mentality crumbled even before the fight started, then you were as good as done. However, if even in the face of a stronger foe, you managed to retain your composure, the likelihood of you winning would increase drastically. That's why true experts tended to be colder than other people. No skill nor potions could train your mentality. Only when you were in the face of true danger would you be able to train your mentality. Fortunately, I had acquired a really good skill to help me with regard to mentality, but I couldn't be too reliant on it. If I relied too much on a skill, then when the time that my skill no longer worked came, either because I was out of mana or for some other reason, I would instantly crumble under the pressure. Alright, I've said enough. Taking out a cigarette from his pocket, Thomas put his sunglasses back on and waved.
Goodbye.
I've left my number on the back of the card. Contact me if you need help with anything. Sure, thanks. After parting ways with Thomas, I quickly collected all my loot that was very nicely dismantled by dungeon seekers, and went to Small Snake. Although no core was found, I managed to make a whooping 100,000 U. 50 KU from my loot, and 50 KU as a fee to keep everything that had happened a secret. For obvious reasons, if news spread out about the incident, dungeon seekers' reputation would crumble. In this accident, apart from me and a couple of people, a total of 39 people had died. 5 of which were the ones that I had previously met. Although I was a bit sad about the fact that no one would ever know how these people disappeared, I could only sign it as refusing wasn't really an option. In this world where people would constantly disappear without someone ever knowing how, the death of these 39 people wouldn't have that much of an impact on society. I just felt bad for their family. Imagine never finding out how your loved one disappeared. I could only lament at the fact that this world's morals had completely twisted since the appearance of the demons and superpowers. Dialing Small Snake's number, I quickly made an appointment with him. Though I almost died, this experience was more precious than I had expected. With the money I had to acquire, I could double the amount I had originally planned to invest. Now all I had to do was wait a month's time before money would rain into my pockets. After parting ways with Rin, Thomas walked back to Dungeon Seekers. Throughout his journey back, Thomas's thoughts couldn't help wander back to Rin. To say that Thomas wasn't confused would be a lie. Typically, youngsters would always choose the flashiest and strongest skill they could find. Since Thomas had granted Rin access to all skills from F to G rank, he had expected him to choose one of the strongest F rank skills. But contrary to his expectations, he chose a G rank skill that focused on mentality rather than being flashy. This came as a pleasant surprise and made him look at Rin in a better light. Had he chosen a flashy F ranked skill, Thomas would have just treated him as one of the many passers-by of his life, but now things were different. This kid seemed to be different from most hot-blooded youths who only thought about being strong without thinking about the process. He seemed rational, which was unusual for someone of his age. Even though there was evidence that showed that Ren had fought against a Baron-ranked demon, Thomas didn't put too much thought into it. Although the demon was Baron-ranked, at the end of the day it was just a clone. It was definitely surprising that Ren had managed to defeat it, but it wasn't something that would make him pay close attention to him. But now, seeing how he did not let greed overtake his rationality, Thomas started thinking that perhaps, just maybe, he had found a hidden gem. I'll have to ask someone to check and send me his files. Being an accomplished rank hero, not many things interested Thomas. He had seen every prodigy that there was out there. Recently there had been rumors of a new prodigy popping up in the lock. He had originally intended to do some research, but now, someone else had caught his interest. After getting someone to transfer all of the information about Ren, Thomas took a quick look at his data. He was quite surprised by what was shown in the information. Talent Assessment D? Rank 1750? At first, he found it ridiculous, but seeing his exam results he could tell the data was not wrong. Was I wrong? Thinking back at what had transpired in the dungeon, although he hadn't seen firsthand how Ren fought, Thomas knew that the exam results were wrong. Having seen a lot of prodigies in his life, Thomas could instantly tell when one was talented. It wasn't so much about their data, it was more about their demeanor. Yubnos to Ren, after he had come back from the dungeon, he was a completely different person. The air around him had changed. Remembering back when he had first met Ren, although Thomas couldn't see his face, he could see that he was a bit unique. He had the air of a tourist. The first impression that Thomas got regarding Ren was that he looked like a tourist. He looked at everything like it was something new and exciting. He didn't look like someone who was just about to enter a danger-filled space. It felt as if he was going on a holiday. Thomas didn't point this fact out to Ren in the beginning because he had seen lots of similar people throughout his life. It wasn't his responsibility to warn people about the dangers that were within a dungeon. However, after the incident, Thomas noticed Ren change. If before he looked like a tourist, now he looked like an immigrant. He had something that he previously didn't have. Resolve. It now seemed that whatever he went through inside of the dungeon had caused him to grow and finally realize how dangerous the world was. He had a similar demeanor to top-class heroes. One that looked at the bigger picture. Though he still was not comparable to them, Ren was in the right direction, and Thomas felt that if given time Ren's name would spread across the globe. Well, his prediction could be wrong, but there was no harm in believing in him. Lightly smiling, Thomas slumped down on his comfy chair. Let's observe a bit more. I feel like he will soon give me a pleasant surprise. Chapter 35, Elective 1. It's been about 2 weeks since I had officially entered the academy, and I couldn't say I was particularly excited about classes. Not only was it hard for me to train, due to the constant stares, but for the theoretical courses, I really couldn't understand a thing. Although they were interesting, because of how advanced all the material was, I didn't even know how to solve the easiest questions. What was the point of them being interesting when you knew nothing about them? I didn't even have the basic foundational knowledge. It was like presenting an integral calculation to a kid who had just learned how to perform additions. It was totally ridiculous. I just realized, at this rate, I might actually not make it past my first year. Although the lock mainly focused on nurturing heroes. In order to pass the first year, you still needed to pass all your courses. If I couldn't pass a course, my chances of graduating, let alone pass the first year, were extremely slim. This was a huge problem. That was because the second year was the main year of the academy arc. It was the year where, after the protagonists who have all settled down and adapted to school life, suddenly came face to face against villains. It was the most impactful part of the Academy arc, which helped the protagonist and his friends grow in both strength and character. Missing such an event would be detrimental to my growth, as not only did I lose access to the top-end facilities provided by the Academy, but I would also lose my chance to gain experience fighting against villains. Alright guys, that marks the end of the lesson. I hope you enjoy yourselves at the elective fair. Disrupting my thoughts was Donna's enchanting voice. So today is the day, huh? Today was the day the elective fair was held. The elective fair was an academy-wide event where the third and second years tried to recruit new members to their elective. Once an elective was chosen, you couldn't change it until the start of the new year. There was a wide selection of electives available for each student to choose from. There was a specialized combat course, a programming course, a dungeon exploration course, and many more activities to choose from. This was also the time when first years would come to contact with the senior years. Because the first, second, and third years were separated, they didn't have many chances to interact with one another. Electives were a great chance for the seniors to interact with their juniors. Moreover, the more first years they managed to recruit to their elective course, the more budget they were granted by the Academy. So every year, the first years found themselves getting assaulted by all types of seniors looking to recruit new members. Furthermore, there was another thing one needed to be careful of when taking into consideration what elective to join. That was, they had to watch out for the hidden politics in certain electives. Factions existed inside of the Academy. A good example was the blood supremacist faction that Gilbert used to be a part of back when he was still a student. Many electives were secretly a recruitment process for certain individuals to their factions. Therefore, one should be careful when choosing an elective, as choosing one faction means being an enemy to all other factions. Fortunately for me, I was keeping a low profile. Since I was fairly unnoticeable, I was almost certain that I wouldn't be dragged into this senseless conflict. However, although I may not encounter any problems during the elective fair, that didn't mean others would have it as easy as me. Take Kevin as an example. Because he stood out too much, he would not only have to face the endless number of people requesting for him to join their elective, but he would also have to fend off against factions who were eager to have a talented person like him in their group. I could already imagine how miserable his life would be for the next few days. Actually, I didn't need to imagine, I already knew. Moreover, since I already knew what would happen in the next few days, I also knew that this was the period where one of the main scenarios for the first-year Academy arc began. Seniors versus juniors. The first major event that Kevin encounters since joining the Lock. An event which even if I didn't want to participate will be forced to join. Why did I even? Just imagining myself encountering more arrogant characters was upsetting my stomach. At least I still had Donna with me. Watching her leave, I couldn't help but admire her beauty, which was more mature compared to the main heroines who were still young. As I was busy admiring her, she turned her head around and met my line of sight. I couldn't remember much after that, as I felt my body suddenly become lethargic. I couldn't even lift my finger. Bang! It was only after I heard the sound of the door closing that I managed to recover from the abnormal state. Breaking into a cold sweat, I tried my best to regain my composure, but... Look at this donkey getting caught looking at Professor Longburn. How pathetic. I know she's beautiful, but how is a bottom ranker like you worthy of her? 3 individuals surrounded the area where I was sitting, causing me to frown. What's going on? Why were they suddenly picking on me? Usually, they would just say some sarcastic remarks and leave, but now it felt like they were coming at me more aggressively than ever before. It was like they were purposely targeting me. Right. How could I forget? Slightly turning my head to the left side of the classroom, I could see Arnold sitting with his arms crossed looking at the front of the classroom indifferently. What's going on? Cat got your tongue? Pushing my left shoulder, a rather lanky individual that seemed to be the leader of the group asked. Why are you looking at Professor Longburn with such disgusting eyes? I know the best way to deal with these kinds of people. Hey, you deaf or something? Say something. Since you couldn't fight in schools, I could just ignore him and get along with my day. If you're caught fighting in school, depending on how serious the violation was, you could potentially be expelled from the academy. Moreover, since my ranking was so low, I doubt they would bother keeping a troublemaking student like me. Oi. I'm talking to you, moron. Bro, I don't think he's ignoring you, I think he's just too terrified to even speak.
Yeah.
What a moron. Think whatever you want, just don't bother me. Grumbling to myself, I stood up and packed my stuff up. You leaving? Putting my bag on my back, I stepped to the side and tried to walk away, but... Not so fast, who told you I'll let you run like that? Looking at him with cold eyes, I coldly spoke. Move. Yubnos to me, after nearly dying inside of the dungeon, my demeanor had become slightly colder. Slightly surprised by my response, the leader of the group laughed. Who do you think you are to make me move? Sigh. Letting out a sigh, I tried to push my way through the trio, but it was to no avail. You think you can pass without my permission? Seeing that the situation was becoming unfavorable for me, I dropped my bag back on my desk and sat down. I really wished fighting was allowed, but since I couldn't afford to be expelled, I could only silently endure their harassment. Taking out my phone, I loaded a game and started playing it. Seeing me sit down, the trio initially smirked with a sense of superiority, but as soon as I started playing my game their smiles faded away, and their complexion turned grim. You. Trembling, the leader pointed his finger at me, trying his best to suppress his rage. Looking up at him, I tilted my head and asked. Need something from me? How dare you make fun of me? Seemingly having lost all sense of reason, the leader of the group tried to assault me, but just as he was about to hit me, his two friends held him back. Stop, Richard. You might get expelled for this. Don't do this, Richard. So his name was Richard. MHHH. Never heard of him. After being restrained by his friends, Richard managed to calm down before staring at me with hatred. You will pay for making fun of me. Hold on a second. Pinching the middle of my brows, I let out another exhausted sigh. Let me get this straight. You're mad at me because I ignored you? Taken aback for a second, Richard processed what I said before looking down at me with disgust. You lowly rancor, you think you're worthy of my anger? No, you clearly were angry. Even a stupid person could realize that. I'll kill you. No, Richard, stop. Stop, Richard. Dumbfounded, I stared at Richard being restrained again. Was this some sort of comedy skit? Were all minor characters supposed to be dumb or something? Huff, I'll remember this. Glaring at me, Richard, who was seemingly out of breath, threatened me with a third-rate villain quote. Please don't. I'll kill you. Richard, don't. Richard. Please stop, I can't take it anymore. PFFFF. Ha 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 ha. Before I knew it, I found myself laughing hysterically at their antics. I was laughing so hard, that tears started gathering in the corner of my eyes. I haven't laughed this hard since coming to this world. It was somehow refreshing. Suddenly being thrown into my own novel, although I tried my best not to show it, I had built up a lot of stress. From the very beginning since arriving here, I had been constantly working towards my goal. From getting the seat of limit, Keiki style, entering the black market, and almost losing my life against a Baron-ranked demon. I had been constantly risking my life. My sudden burst of laughter was not just laughter that stemmed from Richard's group stupidity, but it was also a laugh that swept some of my worries away. Although my journey towards the top was going to become tougher from now on, I should enjoy every free moment that I could get. Although this world was tough, it was still much better than my old world where I was silently waiting for death to come with every passing day. There were times when one just needed to let go of their worries and just relax. Looking at Richard, who was being restrained by his two friends, the corners of my mouth involuntarily pulled upwards. Seeing me laugh, as if a switch had been flipped, all three of them stopped at the same time. Is he laughing at us? Is this lowly rancor looking down on us? Is he treating us like some sort of clowns? Somehow I feel like I did something I shouldn't have. It seems like my laughter had wounded their pride. Feeling their intense glare, I pretty much knew that they were going to assault me. It was fine before because Richard was being restrained, but now that all three of them wished to beat me up, a fight was inevitable. You think this is funny? Do we look like a joke to you? Approaching me with intense hatred in their eyes, I could see from their eyes that they no longer cared about the repercussions. All that was reflected in their eyes was me. But just as they were about to attack me, a stern voice interrupted them. Let's leave it at that, shall we? Stopping right before me, the trio halted their movement and turned towards the voice that told them to stop. Who are you to med? Kevin. Turning around and figuring out whose voice it was, the trio froze on the spot. Being in a society where rank meant everything, they were overcome with fear and couldn't stop trembling as soon as they saw who was speaking to them. Kevin Voss, the first-year number 1 ranked student. We weary must letten to him know his place. As his voice trembled, Richard spoke to Kevin. And what did he do exactly? Overwhelmed by Kevin's charisma, Richard started fumbling on his words. Placing his hand on Richard's shoulder, Kevin patted him a couple of times. Let's leave it here, okay? Repeatedly nodding his head, Richard and his group immediately fled the scene. Seeing this happening before me, I couldn't help but slightly admire Kevin, who with just a few words made the trio run. I have to say, there were definitely perks in standing out. Like being able to swiftly deal with low-level characters with just a few words. But in hindsight, facing low-level charters was much better than dealing with annoying high-level ones. So I was still going to try my best to remain as hidden as possible. Thank you for your help. Standing up, I put my bag on my back and expressed my gratitude to Kevin, who simply nodded his head in acknowledgement. Finally free, I quickly left the classroom and headed towards my dorm.